Men's Euro final and the state of women's soccer. We're joined by Mike Bako, sports editor at dailynational.com. Good to see you. So this has turned out to be a pretty big deal. We always seem surprised, but the interest in women's football or soccer, whatever you're going to call it, is a pretty big deal.
It is a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal not only in England and Europe, where we're focusing right now, because so many of the best players are playing there in their professional leagues, but even here in the States, we are seeing the scales kind of tilting towards women's soccer, just in terms of seeing what comparable ratings are like to MSL, seeing what stadium capacities and people attending some of those games. I think one of the things that on a world stage and as well as here, what they're seeing is that the top players are staying in their region. So when you are going to the England Professional League, or you are going to some of these European leagues, you are seeing the top players, and that is really helping the growth, as opposed to here in the States, where the best U.S. players often are going overseas.
How much are these teams worth, that even the ones that don't make it to the finals, but we always say, oh, this team's worth $1 billion or half $1 billion. What are these teams worth?
Well, I mean, when it comes to the national team, what you're looking at least in this tournament, is the prize money. And the prize money is about 16 million euros that's spread out in different tiers. The winners are going to split about 600,000 euros, which is a pittance compared to what the U.S. players are getting. But what we're seeing on a bigger scale in terms of the competitive nature of some of these women's leagues, and nationally as well, is that they are going for the equal pay route. First model, Megan Rapinoe, certainly was a big advocate for that, but we see that in Spain, we see that in the U.S., Swiss team. But one of the areas where we're not seeing that is in Germany, and they're playing in these finals. So when it comes to the value of these national teams, it's about, again, finishing high in these tournaments, and that's where you really get your split of the money. So that's really where the value comes in. And for England and Germany, they're right at the top.
Right. We often talk about, oh, what do they make from the tournament? What happens if they win? But we don't talk enough about sponsorships. And that's something that, whether you're in the tennis world or in the football world, when the match is over, so to speak, companies approach them and say, hey, will you sponsor our product? And that's worth a ton of money, isn't it?
That's worth a ton of money. We call that kind of like second life of an athlete, especially for a female athlete, where when you look at the salaries for soccer players, when you look at for professional basketball players here, the WNBA, top salaries are tipping out at about $180,000. $180,000 for the top female WNBA players. So they are relying not only on some of that overseas money, but that sponsorship money that can sometimes double, triple, quadruple what they're making for those top players. And it's the same thing that we see on the national scale for the women players. How
does it work? If you're a representative for a major athletic brand, or you're looking to find athletes, what is that process like? Do you contact the athlete, or they have agents, or there's businesses that help you do that, I assume?
Well, here's the interesting thing. When it comes to female athletes, yes, some of those top players have agents, managers, but when it comes to those second-tier players, or maybe that up-and-coming player who makes a name for themselves, oftentimes they don't have those high-powered agents. So when a big brand like Credit Suisse, who has a big sponsorship with a lot of the women's soccer leagues and tournaments, they basically, that merger is made in many times by the national teams themselves, or their teams that they're playing for, because they don't have that infrastructure in place, where for an NBA team, you're able to go to the agent, a manager, one of those secondary type people. That infrastructure does not hold. So a lot of times the teams and the national teams are the facilitators for that.
And I'm guessing that the agent or the middleman takes a pretty big cut of whatever that is. What about the merchandise? Licensed merchandise is always a huge moneymaker. The players probably don't get a cut of that, I'm guessing, but it's still big money.
It's big money. I mean, it's baked into some of these prize winnings, the purse that they're able to get if they are able to win. But you mentioned the amount of people that are coming, doubling the attendance of 2017, probably setting a women's record for a crowd at Wembley for the final on Sunday. But a lot of that merchandise money, that is where the money making really happens for a lot of these tournaments. And that's kind of baked into the overall revenue, but so little of that trickles down to the players. It's not like in the professional sports here in the US where there are licensing agreements. Players get certain percentages. They have a very powerful players union that negotiates these deals. When it comes to the soccer federations, unless you're on the men's side and you're a Messi or Ronaldo or someone like that, where you have a piece of that, so much of it, especially on the women's side, I don't want to say they're being taken advantage of, but that's just not at the point where they're able to negotiate for that.